interesting and quite a detailed presentation. So, of course, one can go on and on talking about this. But let me begin by being a devil's advocate for the time being. Okay, let me begin being a devil's advocate. So, now all that you have said, it looks like that all you have done is being a talking head and nothing much. We have had this business all along, people going yap, 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 yap. Nobody listens. The government of India is promoting Panchagavya for agriculture. Where the hell are you talking about and what have you achieved? You have given a very long lecture, but at the ground, have we moved beyond Panchagavya and doing yagnas to purify the Ganga and, stuff like that? Have we done any progress, any sort?
All right. Yeah, that's a very valid question. We face these questions all the time from people in the government and sometimes in the civil society. The point is, people will approach a problem from their own angle. So if somebody wants to approach a problem of sustainable nitrogen management through Panchagavya, so be it. I know it is pseudoscience and I will not hesitate to say it is pseudoscience. But at the same time, if it helps them, many farmers actually are adopting zero budget natural farming. We tell them it is not correct, but they are adopting. They will not believe me, but they will believe a local RSS worker who will say our cow is great, so only cow manure is useful, buffalo is not useful. They will listen to that. The reason for that partially is ideologues have managed to convince the farmers that scientists have not considered your welfare. Scientists have worked for themselves. Markets have worked for themselves. Industries have worked for themselves. Today the farmer is desperate. He is finding himself to be totally neglected by the market mechanism, by the international politics, by multinationals and by governments. And if somebody, local karyakarta comes and says, scientist bhi aise hi hai, he will believe. And if he says, I will give you something, at least he wants to try. The good thing about a farmer is they want to try anything you give as long as it works for them. They will try GM crop, they will try Panchagavya, they will try everything. In fact, we know many farmers are dividing their plot into 3-4 parts. Anybody goes and promotes something, they'll say, acha, aapke liye ye plot. So one plot for fertilizer, one plot for gomutra, one plot for something else, organic farming. They are trying everything. And they are not fools. They are trying not only to please you, they are also trying to test for themselves what works for them. So we are in a temporary phase where we have to face challenges with the pseudoscience issues, but the ultimate test of it all is the user confidence. When the user confidence goes, it doesn't matter whether it goes against the scientists or whether it goes against the religious mumbo jumbo. Eventually they will go for both if we don't keep giving the better alternative to them all the time. So we have to learn from the farmers as much as they have to learn from everybody else, and there are no shortcuts here.
So I think that's a important point you are making here. But let's see, if we have to gain the trust of the farmers, as scientists I'm talking about, it is also important to see that what we have done as a scientist and we have exploited that properly or not. For example, here in JNU, you know very well that there was a huge scientific effort to clone the nitrogen fixation genes, and at that time it was touted as it's going to solve the nitrogen problem in India. And this was, I think, 25 years ago, right? What happened after that? The professor retired and the lab dissolved and everything vanished.
Yeah, what is now the School of Molecular Medicine used to be a DST Center for Genetic Engineering of Nitrogen Fixation.
Those two mics are meant for the recording,
yeah.
So they need to be able to speak.
Okay, I have to hold both the mic together. Okay, all three together. All right. So there used to be a Center for Genetic Engineering funded by the Government of India exclusively for developing nitrogen fixation capacity. They were not, so there are two strands of this. One is, can you make the plant fix atmospheric nitrogen for its own requirement and then permanently relieve the world from fertilizers. This research is going on even now. Only some bacteria currently have that capacity. Pulses have that because these bacteria are present in the pulses roots as symbionts. So traditionally people used to do pulse cereal or pulse tea or pulse fruit or pulse flower so that the nutrient cycle is managed. They have done that successfully for 10,000 years. We messed it up in 50 years with fertilizer. So when Professor Das was working in this area, he was trying to improve the capacity of the microbes to fix atmospheric nitrogen without getting inhibited under the conditions of farming, because they are also inhibited by oxygen. The nitrogen fixation is actually anaerobic in nature, and you have to create conditions for that to happen in the bug or in the plant. The nodules in the legumes are basically structures created for that purpose. So if you can't create nodules in rice or wheat to create that local anoxic zone, you cannot put these organisms in rice or wheat. So that is one area of research going on for decades, and it may take many more decades to succeed or fail. And this microbial work that he's talking about did manage to produce a couple of genetically engineered bugs that were more successful in multiplying under farming conditions. He retired and he transferred that genetically engineered microbe to Indian Agriculture Research Institute to follow up, but they lost interest in it, and eventually it was never carried through. This happens. A major problem for us, all of us, to think about is succession planning. A person retires, a whole lifetime of expertise vanishes. Another person starts from scratch in a different field. So what is happening is, you go to library, and when I was a member of the library committee in JNU, this was my most favorite argument against every vice chancellor. Every time a dean of a school changes, library subscription pattern used to change. Those days they are all hard copy, no online. So there used to be gaps. 3 years, if a botanist becomes a life science head, only botany journals are there and zoology are not there, or vice versa. And most journals have gaps, and these gaps almost are of the period of the deanship. So this gap for this dean, this gap for this dean, this gap for this dean. In the same way, there are gaps in expertise at the institutional level, but nobody cares. No vice chancellor has thought about why JNU ceases to be a national center of eminence for photosynthesis. After 3 generations of people have worked and made the place to reckon with in photosynthesis in the whole world. Professor Singhal, Professor Mohanty, Professor Tripathi, and then nobody. So today, if the world has to remember one place in India for photosynthesis, it only used to remember JNU. If the world has to remember one place for tissue culture, it used to remember DU. Today nobody wants to do it there. So this is another problem. So expertise vanishing is not a good thing for the institution. For the individual, he has to leave at some point, right? So you may succeed, you may fail. So the point that he is making is it has not reached anywhere. Yes, it hasn't reached anywhere yet. Should he stop trying? I think no. He may still fail for another 50 years, but if he succeeds after another 50 years, that would permanently liberate you from this 100-year-old problem of depending on Haber-Bosch process. There are also people working on more environment-friendly methods of making fertilizer, because Haber-Bosch process is like almost Bhopal gas disaster. Okay, so that kind of conditions are not feasible environmentally friendly. So that research is also happening. Catalysts are also. People have to work in various areas. Many of them they will fail. Many prototypes will fail before they come to the field. Some will fail during field trials. Will you stop doing research? You have to do. It's an investment for the future most of the time. I am more hopeful in that sense.
Okay. This is the last question. So now you have spoken about the Green Revolution and what it has done, what it has led up to. But if you go into states outside of the Green Revolution areas, I know in the Northeast and many other places, politicians still is selling that same old dream of green revolution, white revolution, that is it. So I find government at one level is perhaps even talking, perhaps even thinking about sustainable use of nitrogen. But at another level, they are also promoting this color revolutions. And we have seen both in politics and in science, these color revolutions have led nowhere.
No, I fully agree with you. Quite often they do this partly to take credit for what has been happened in the past. But it's also a fact that that the dream of green revolution has not been given up. Telangana is doing green revolution now, and it is facing the same mess that Punjab and Haryana have already started facing, because the cropping patterns are shifting with the availability of irrigation, with the new lift irrigation scheme. 5 times, 10 times growth in one crop over other crops, and whole social systems that have evolved around certain cropping patterns are beginning to change. So one needs to learn lessons from the past. We can only be wiser in retrospect. We have done certain things, good things through green revolution. We also did many bad things which we did not understand at that point. But you can at least be wiser in retrospect, and you can try to make course correction along the way. But that is not happening, not at least to the extent that it should happen. And my fear, I agree with your concern in that sense, is what green revolution has in terms of, the infrastructure from green revolution, it has stopped in about 10 to 20 years since it started. By the end of 70s or 80s, the infrastructure for green revolution in Punjab, Haryana was already in place. What we now see is only a continuum of that system of production. In non-green revolution areas, which about 80% of Indian agriculture is still not touched by green revolution in terms of that kind of infrastructure. Wherever it is happening, like now in Telangana, it is actually ending up repeating the same cycle of mistakes. So that is something that we should be very, very worried about. And we need actually a social campaign leading up to some kind of a political consensus that business as usual is not an option anymore. We need sustainable production. That doesn't mean you have to stop fertilizer. That doesn't mean you have to stop tractors. In fact, zero tillage is recommended now. No tilling required. Just sow your seed. Even the way people used to put soaking of seeds in a bed, that is also not required. Directly put it, no transplantation. It can be done. Similarly, you can see sometimes the government procurement, as I was telling, shifts farmer behavior, producer behavior. And if government is willing to buy a vaccine, industry is willing to make it. If government is willing to buy a grain, farmer is willing to produce it. It's as simple as that. But government has its MSP listed for 24 crops or 28, I don't remember, of that order. But it buys only 2 or 3. Farmer only produces those 2 or 3. And government is adamant, and let me tell you, it is also our responsibility as academicians. There are some very eminent economists, including Ashok Gulati, who had been advising the government on the farm laws, and he is the biggest reason why the government is hell-bent on not willing to extend MSP or procure other crops. They want to kill the existing MSP rather than extending it to other crops, and that is a disaster. He is not willing to agree, and I had a debate with him that it is a political, it is not your ideological imagination that subsidy is bad, MSP is bad. Well, as a professor in a classroom, you can write a paper or say this. It's a hard-won political battle on the ground. 750 lives have been paid by farmers to win that MSP has to be retained and farmlands have to be taken back. So do professors still continue to advise the government against the will of the farmers of this country? This is a question we have to ask ourselves as academicians. And sometimes these policies affect what they produce and how they produce all the way down the chain. We should simply be buying oil seeds. We don't need for that matter, genetically engineered mustard. We just need more land area for oilseeds. It has declined. I showed you the table. We need more dal. Do you know that we import dal from Africa? We export rice and import dal. The world thinks, Africa is under famine and the world feeds Africa. But Africa feeds India. Protein. What can be bigger shame than that? And not South Africa, Morocco gives us dal, tur dal. So these are some of the issues that, but if we are not looking beyond our own immediate day-to-day molecular biology, Balka research, we won't understand these linkages. And they're as important for economists as they are for us as biologists.
So I think we had lively discussions. So let's put it there. Thank you.